Thank you, Ceann Corlett. In a week from today, the Public Prosecution Service in Northern Ireland will meet families of the victims of Bloody Sunday to brief them on the PPS decisions arising from their investigation into the events of Bloody Sunday. This, as you can imagine, is an incredibly sensitive time for those families. And last weekend, the PPS asked people to avoid speculation ahead of that meeting out of sensitivity to the families' concerns and to the families' interests. However, that justifiable call has been ignored at the highest levels of the British Government and indeed the British Tory party. Last weekend we had Boris Johnson adding his article in the Daily Telegraph on tweets which were callously inappropriate, which trampled all over the feelings of those families in his statements. And he ignored the fact, Boris Johnson ignored the fact that 13 people were murdered on that day and a 14th died from injuries that they suffered on that day. He also ignored the apology that was given by former Prime Minister David Cameron specifically to the people of Derry and the families for the hurt and the wrongs of that day. Now, it's easy to dismiss Boris Johnson. He gets paid to be bizarre. But he cannot be led away with those kind of remarks, given that he's a former Foreign Secretary. However, you cannot dismiss the words of Karen Bradley. Karen Bradley is the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. She yesterday in the UK Parliament added to the enormous distress of those families and completely ignored the views and the requests of the Public Prosecution Service expressed last weekend. Her comments were completely inappropriate. They're made worse as she ignored due process and she ignored the impending decision of the PPS. She again walked all over the rights, the feelings and the sensitivities of the families involved. She ignored the grief, she ignored the frustration. And those remarks cannot be let go unchecked by this Oireachtas in light of the history of the events of Bloody Sunday. Taoiseach, you know, and every Minister for Foreign Affairs has had to deal with legacy issues on both nationalist and unionist side. And the grief and the frustration of all families is still very raw while we try and tackle those legacies. And as a Parliament and as a political class, we have tried to approach that with sensitivity. But yesterday's remarks were absolutely callous, completely out of order and totally inappropriate. I gather you met Karen Bradley last night in London, or you were due to discuss this with her. How did you put forward the anger of people in relation to her remarks yesterday? Did she realise how offensive and how careless her remarks were? Do you accept, Taoiseach, that her comments yesterday show a complete disrespect to the families? Mrs Bradley said that her comments were misrepresented. I don't accept that explanation. Do you? And do you think that she should immediately withdraw her remarks and issue a full apology to the families of those she offended?
Thank you, Deputy, for raising this issue. It's something that this House does need to address today. I met with Secretary of State Bradley yesterday evening, and I can assure you that she is in no doubt as to where we stand on this issue. I made it very clear what the position of the Irish Government is, that there should be effective investigations into all deaths during the Troubles, regardless of the perpetrator. That is what was agreed at Stormont House, and that is what needs to be legislated for now. There are no amnesties from prosecution provided for in the Good Friday Agreement or in any subsequent agreements, including the Stormont House Agreement. The Irish Government has been clear, and we were clear again last night, that it would not support any proposal to introduce such a measure for state or non-state actors. And I reiterated that point very directly last night. The Secretary of State's second statement yesterday afternoon, that where there is evidence of wrongdoing, it should always be investigated, whoever is responsible, was important, but perhaps not enough. But I think that we also need to stop and recognise that her comments in the morning did cause intense concern and hurt and distress to families who lost loved ones in dreadful circumstances. After all these years, their level of trust is at an understandably low level. Their confidence that there will be a framework brought forward that properly addresses their deeply felt concerns is fragile, to say the least. And that goes for all victims of violence perpetrated by anyone. I've met many such families. Every one of them deserve respect, support and sensitivity. We have a responsibility to attempt to meet their concerns in a comprehensive way, and that means fully implementing the Stormont House framework. In the last few minutes, and most people in the House won't have had access to the statement, but in the last few minutes the Secretary of State has issued a much more detailed statement than her second statement yesterday. She apologises. She says she is profoundly sorry for the offence and hurt that her words have caused. She says that the language was wrong and was deeply insensitive. She says very clearly that she wants to see justice properly delivered. She says very clearly that she and her government believes fundamentally in the rule of law, and where there is any evidence of wrongdoing, this should be pursued without fear or favour, whoever the perpetrators may be, in the context of the tragedies that we've seen in Northern Ireland. So, to answer your questions, we raise these issues very directly. I think that the Secretary of State recognises the seriousness of the statement that was made yesterday. I think she is making a very significant effort today to try to correct that and has made a very direct apology to the families. I understand she's likely to be in Belfast this evening and may comment further, and she also may be making direct contact with the families concerned.
Deputy Calleary.
Thank you. That statement doesn't go far enough, because that statement is digging again. It ignores so many other things. You said you've been clear with the British government, and I accept that you have, but they have ignored the will of this House in relation to the Dublin Monaghan bombings. They've ignored the issues around the Pat Finucane case, the Ballymurphy case. And there is a mindset, it seems, of ignoring these things and hoping that they will go away, but they can't. Because this House owes it to the families involved that we will defend their rights, we will defend their loved ones, and we will stand up for their interests. And Taoiseach, how do you expect these families to work with Karen Bradley from here on in, given her remarks yesterday? She made those remarks in the House of Commons. She wasn't under pressure. She was answering questions. It cannot be said they were calculated, frankly. And the fact that she made the remarks has added enormously to the stress and ignored the wishes of her own PPS for people not to get involved in this issue. So, Taoiseach, you have to know and understand the anger of people around this issue and around the other issues, as I've mentioned, Dublin Monaghan, and that the British government have a mindset to keep ignoring it and keep hoping they'll go away. That's what was behind yesterday's statement, and that's actually the real feeling of the British government in relation to these issues.
Well, Deputy, the first thing I'd say is that I think you do need to read the statement in full before dismissing it entirely. The second thing I would say, though, is that I do understand what you're saying in terms of the depth of feeling and distress that these comments have added to. The timing couldn't be worse. When you look at what is likely to happen next week, where 14 families are waiting for a briefing from the Public Prosecution Service in Northern Ireland, that is a very stressful time for them. When you consider the timing of the judgment in relation to the Pat Finucane case, again, which has heightened focus on legacy issues. When you look at the Police Ombudsman's investigation and the information flow from the PSNI, which again has raised real concerns. When you look at ongoing requests for more information to be released in relation to Dublin Monaghan bombings. This is a time of real sensitivity. It's also a time of real sensitivity for many victims of violence and terrorism, too, from Kingsmill to many other areas, as well as, of course, Ballymurphy families. So we are at a really sensitive point in Northern Ireland, where legacy needs to be dealt with in a sensitive way.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
The Secretary of State is very aware of that. That's why she has issued a long statement today, and I hope that we will see direct contact with some of the families concerned to look to try to rebuild some trust and faith following yesterday's comments.
Thank you, Deputy Pearson.